Get ready to hear terrifying stories of demonic encounters that will make you think twice before stepping into certain places, like in the one you're about to hear, where a contractor finds out the house he was sent to inspect is hiding something with horns, and it lives upstairs. But before we get into the story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our terrifying stories. And tell me in the comments, from which city or country are you watching this video? On that morning, the wind cut through like it wanted to tear the skin off my face. Oklahoma always had that strange way of seeming empty, as if something there was just waiting to be noticed. I had my truck bed full of tools, ready for another day of work. Renovating old houses was my specialty, but I can't say I didn't have my reservations about some of them. The problem is, since I was a kid, I've always been sensitive to certain things. Call it a sixth sense, intuition, or whatever you like. But I've seen and felt things that would make a lot of people lose sleep. The call came last minute. My boss called saying there was an isolated property that needed to be assessed urgently. Go there, Henry, take a look and see if you can save anything before the city tears it all down. He spoke as if it were just another house falling apart. But as soon as I jotted down the address and hung up the phone, a bad feeling hit me. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a silent warning, a chill that starts at the nape of your neck and runs down your spine. The road there was long and deserted. Dry trees, empty fields, and that gray sky that seemed to weigh down on your head. When I finally saw the house, I understood why no one wanted to get close. It stood in the middle of an overgrown lot, the paint peeling and the windows black, as if they were waiting for someone to look in. The gate was down, creaking in the wind. There was something about all of it that didn't seem like mere abandonment. It was different, heavier. I parked the truck at the entrance and stayed there for a few seconds, watching. There was no sound of birds or insects, just the wind. I grabbed my clipboard, got out, and started walking toward the porch, feeling each step echo in my head as if I were entering a place where I shouldn't be. As I touched the doorknob, I realized the door wasn't locked. It opened with a soft click, revealing a dark, dusty hallway. The smell was strong, a mix of damp wood, mold, and something that reminded me of iron, maybe rust, maybe dried blood. I entered slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. With each step, the floor creaked as if complaining about my presence. I passed by a room with furniture covered in stained sheets. The wall clock was stopped at 3:17. As I explored the place, I had that old feeling, the one of being watched. It wasn't the first time it had happened to me, but there, at that moment, it felt much more intense. I could feel a negative energy lingering in the air, as if each object, each wall, had witnessed something terrible. It was in the kitchen that I found the first truly strange thing. On the wall, right above the sink, it was written in crooked, dark letters, "It lives upstairs." The paint, or whatever it was, seemed to have been applied in a hurry, almost like a desperate warning. My heart started to race. I stood there for a moment, staring at those words, trying to understand if it was some kind of joke or vandal's mark. But there was something about the way it was written, as if each letter had been made with fear. That's when I noticed the sound. Footsteps, slow footsteps coming from upstairs. It wasn't the occasional creak of an old house. It was the distinct sound of someone moving, the weight shifting the floorboards. I held my breath, trying to listen better. 2 steps, pause, 2 more steps. My instinct told me to get out of there immediately, but part of me, the perhaps more foolish part, needed to see what was up there. I grabbed my flashlight and started climbing the stairs. Each step seemed heavier than the last, and that feeling of impending danger only grew. It was as if the air became denser, harder to breathe. I reached the top and saw a narrow hallway with closed doors on both sides. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. The sound of the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I didn't know where the next sound would come from, and at that moment, I realized that maybe I wasn't prepared to see what awaited me behind one of those doors. I stood in the middle of the hallway, trying to decide where to go first. The flashlight beam ran over the stained walls, and for a second, I thought I saw a shadow move too fast at the end of the hallway. My heart raced, The old wood under my feet seemed to groan with each step, as if trying to warn me not to continue. The first door on the right was slightly ajar. I pushed it slowly, and the sound of the hinges echoed too loudly in that silence. Inside, there was only an empty room, with peeling wallpaper and a broken window, letting the cold wind in. When I turned to leave, I swear I felt something brush my shoulder. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing. Still, the smell of sulfur filled my nostrils. I moved to the next door. This one was closed but gave way easily. As I entered, I saw a large old wardrobe with its door slightly open. I didn't want to, but my curiosity forced me to open it. It was empty. At least that's what I thought until I heard a low sigh coming from somewhere inside. I backed away immediately, slamming the door shut, as if that could prevent whatever was in there from coming out. It was at that moment that I heard a different sound. It wasn't footsteps. It was a slow scratching, coming from the ceiling above me, running the length of the hallway. The noise approached until it stopped right above my head. I raised the flashlight, and for a moment, I thought I saw claws piercing through the wood. The door at the end of the hallway was open now. I was sure that when I arrived, it was closed. The darkness inside seemed thicker, almost solid. A strong smell of earth and decay came from there. I felt my skin crawl, but before I could take a step, something moved in the shadow. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, with horns curved backward and long legs, but bent the wrong way, like an animal's. The body was completely black, as if it absorbed the light. The eyes. They weren't ordinary eyes. They glowed a deep red, fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel small, vulnerable. The creature tilted its head to the side, as if studying me. For a second, I was paralyzed, unable to react. Then, it opened its mouth and let out a scream. It wasn't a human sound. It was something so high-pitched and yet so deep that it seemed to enter through my ears and tear my mind apart. The impact of that sound made me stumble backward. I felt my legs give way, and before I knew it, I was falling down the stairs. I hit my shoulder on one step, my head on another, until I stopped at the bottom of the entrance. My flashlight flew to the side, and the light went out. Still dazed, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps upstairs. But they weren't coming down. It was as if the thing was just watching from afar, waiting for me to try to return. But that would never happen. With a desperate effort, I got up and ran to the door, which slammed behind me with a bang that echoed across the entire field. I ran to the truck, feeling the cold air tear at my lungs. I started the engine and sped away without looking back. Only when the house was out of sight did I realize I was shaking all over. And it wasn't just from the shock of the fall. It was from what I had seen. When I got to the office, my boss asked how the house was. It can't be saved. Rotten wood, compromised structure. It's not worth the work. That was the only thing I could say. If I told the truth, he would laugh in my face. Or worse, think I had gone crazy. And to be honest, I wasn't sure myself if I hadn't. I never came across anything like it again. But since that day, I've come to firmly believe that there are dark forces waiting to be awakened. Most people only believe when they see, and if you're lucky, you never will. What was upstairs in that house wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something ancient, patient, and, for some reason, it was waiting for me. Maybe it still is. Creepy, right? What did you think of that story? On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Drop your opinion in the comments. After seeing such a clear demonic apparition, it's hard to believe forces like that can manifest in other ways. Like in the next story, where an impossible trail of footprints kept an entire town on edge for decades. On that June morning in 1976, the sun was already beating down hard on the narrow streets of Chadwick, but the heat was nothing compared to the tension spreading through the whispers and uneasy glances of the neighborhood. I was still young, but I could tell when something was off. People walked fast as if trying to avoid looking at the ground, and when they did, they quickly looked away. That's how I found out why. Strange marks appeared on the asphalt of the main street, scorched as if something incandescent had passed through there during the night. But they weren't tire marks or human footprints. They were hoof prints, goat hooves to be exact. Only these were larger, deeper, and with an irregular shape that made no sense at all. The hoof prints didn't follow a normal path. They started out of nowhere, in the middle of the street, as if the creature had simply appeared there, and ended abruptly, with no trace of where it had gone. Some were so deep that it was impossible to imagine anyone making them with common tools. And there was something else that gave me the feeling of being watched. Each hoof print had a slightly different shape. They weren't repeated molds, as they would be if it were a hoax. It was as if the thing that left them moved in an unstable, almost deformed way. As I stood there, hypnotized, I saw Mr. Aubrey, who worked at the gas station on the corner, whispering to another man, This ain't of this world." It wasn't long before the rumors started. They said that around those parts there were people involved in satanic rituals. Some swore they had seen black candles lit near the woods, and others talked about strange chants in the early hours of the morning. I didn't know what to believe, but the negative energy hanging in the air was almost palpable. There was something on that street that seemed tainted. That same day, a group of investigators showed up. 2 of them were police experts, but the one who caught everyone's attention was a man not in uniform. Later, I found out he was a paranormal phenomena expert named Marcel Gagnon. He walked slowly, crouching to analyze every detail of the hoof prints, and sometimes he would stand still, motionless, as if listening to something no one else could hear. When they tried to reproduce the marks using heated iron and molds, the result was completely different. Not even the color of the scorch marks on the asphalt was the same. That's when the rumors turned into certainties for many people. This was not the work of humans. In the neighborhood, people started avoiding that street after sunset. My mom told me not to go near it, but it was impossible to resist the curiosity. On the 3rd day after the discovery, I went there alone, in the late afternoon. The sun was already low, and the golden light highlighted the scorched marks on the asphalt. They seemed even stranger at that hour, as if they glowed slightly. And then, for an instant, I swear I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just fear. It was that unmistakable feeling of being watched, even though I was completely alone. The most disturbing thing was realizing that some marks seemed fresher than the day before, as if something had come back at night to leave new hoof prints. But that wasn't possible. Or at least it shouldn't have been. I ran back home trying not to look back, but with the clear impression that if I turned around, I would see something standing right in the middle of the street, following me with its gaze. That night, I could barely sleep. Every creak in the house seemed louder. Every shadow in the room seemed to move on its own. And even with the windows closed, I swore I could feel a cold draft passing under the door. The next morning, the news spread early. The hoof prints had appeared in another part of town, and the strangest thing, there was no connection between the previous location and the new one. It was as if that thing could appear anywhere it wanted. I decided to go back to see with my own eyes. The new stretch was near the river, in an older part of the district, where the asphalt was already worn and uneven. The marks there were even clearer, as if the heat that formed them had been more intense. The edge of each hoof print was blackened, and in the center, there was a reddish hue, as if the asphalt had been burned from within. That made no sense. I crouched to look closely and noticed something that gave me chills. Inside one of the marks, there was a whitish residue, similar to ash, but with a strong metallic smell that I had never sensed before. Marcel Gagnon was there again, surrounded by onlookers. This time, he seemed more tense. I saw him run his hand over one of the marks and close his eyes as if trying to feel something. When he opened them, his face was pale. He said only, "This isn't over." And he walked away without explaining anything. Those words kept hammering in my mind. It isn't over. But what exactly was yet to come? That very night, a group of residents gathered to talk about what was happening. Some were convinced it was the work of people involved in Satanism. They talked about strange symbols painted in an old abandoned cabin near the road to Saint Adolphe. Others swore they had seen a tall figure with horns crossing the field behind the church. I knew it could be an exaggeration, but the atmosphere in the district was so charged that any story, no matter how absurd, seemed possible. 2 days later, everything got worse. The hoof prints appeared for the third time, now closer to the center in front of a bakery. It was as if something wanted to be seen, wanted everyone to know it was there. When I arrived to see, the scene was almost surreal. The marks went in a straight line to the middle of the street and ended exactly at the bakery door, as if the creature had entered. But the owner swore that no one had passed by there that night. It was that night that my life changed forever. I woke up in the middle of the night to a low, rhythmic sound, like footsteps on the asphalt. I went to the window, and down there, on the corner, I saw something that still haunts me to this day. The street was almost completely dark, but the light of a street lamp partially illuminated a figure standing still, motionless, looking in my direction. It was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, and the silhouette clearly showed 2 curved horns. The worst was that the ground around it glowed as if it were incandescent. I was paralyzed, unable to move. Then, suddenly, the figure took a step, and I heard the dry metallic sound of hooves hitting the asphalt, a sound that echoed through the street, even in the absolute silence. With each step, a small flash appeared on the ground, as if the mark was being engraved there, burning the asphalt at the same instant. I don't exactly remember how I managed to step away from the window. All I know is that the next day, at dawn, I went there to see if I had imagined it all. And there they were, the same scorched marks, starting right at the corner in front of my house. And once again, they ended abruptly, just a few meters from my door. At that moment, I understood what Marcel had said. It wasn't over, and perhaps it would never be over. Whatever that spiritual presence was, it knew where to find me, and it was getting closer. Weird, huh? Those mysterious footprints proved that evil can leave its mark, but sometimes it shows itself right in front of us, especially when we mess with things we don't understand. Like in the next story, where a simple seance nearly turned into a full-on possession. The night that changed everything began like any other child's birthday party, with cake, soda, and a joyful mess of voices and laughter. I had just turned 11, and my aunt's house in the countryside of the United States was filled with friends from school. We ran around the backyard lit by the porch lights playing tag, and our only concern was not spilling juice cups on the living room carpet. But deep down, I had something different in mind for that night. Ever since I was little, I had always been fascinated by ghost stories, urban legends, and anything involving the supernatural. While some girls collected stickers or were interested in trendy bands, I lost myself in books about strange happenings and supernatural experiences. The mere idea of being close to something inexplicable gave me goosebumps and piqued my curiosity. It was almost inevitable that someone would bring up the subject later. Sitting on the bedroom floor, well after 10 o'clock, one of the girls mentioned a spirit session she had seen in a video on the internet. Another said she knew a way to do it, but it only worked if it was done at midnight. Of course, I didn't think twice. I said we could try it in the backyard far from the house so as not to wake my aunt. The excitement was immediate, and everyone agreed, even those who were already scared just by hearing the idea. We started preparations around 11:30. We took some candles from the kitchen cabinet, a plate to serve as the center of the circle, and even a notebook to write down any responses. We went down in silence to the backyard, which was shrouded in an almost solid twilight. The house was set back from the road, surrounded by huge trees that loomed against the sky, blocking part of the moonlight. The wind blew gently, carrying a smell of damp earth mixed with the perfume of the garden flowers. We formed the circle and lit the candles, which trembled as if they had hesitated to illuminate that space. At first, everything seemed like a big joke. We laughed, whispered, and one of the girls even cracked a joke to break the mood. But as the clock hands approached 12, the atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. First, the wind stopped. Then, the crickets fell silent. It wasn't just silence, it was a total absence of sound, as if the world outside had disappeared. A strange feeling began to bother me. It was as if someone were standing behind me, watching every move. My body reacted before my mind realized. Goosebumps ran up the back of my neck and I felt a weight in the air, a negative energy that left me restless. I turned my head slowly and that was when I saw it. Among the shadows at the edge of the trees there was a figure, tall, much taller than any adult I knew. I couldn't see details of the body, just a dark outline that seemed to absorb the little light around. But the face was almost luminous white, expressionless, smooth like porcelain. Every second I stared at that presence, the feeling of cold increased, as if it were draining the heat from the air. I don't know how long I stood paralyzed. I only realized that the other girls had seen it too when one of them let out a sharp scream. "Run!" The circle broke in a second. They dashed toward the house, pushing the porch door, while I stayed a moment longer, hypnotized by the figure. It was then that it moved. It didn't walk, it didn't take steps. It simply approached, gliding across the ground like a liquid shadow. My instinct screamed at me to run, and that's what I did. I stumbled into the house, slamming the door hard. We locked it with the key, put on the latch, and even placed a chair against it. My hands were shaking so much I could barely turn the key. The sound of the girls panting filled the room until my aunt appeared, drawn by the commotion. She didn't ask questions, didn't laugh, nor did she call us silly. On the contrary, she looked at us seriously and went straight to a cabinet in the hallway. She returned with a bundle of dried sage, lit it, and began walking through the house, releasing a strong smoke that filled the air. As she did this, she murmured words softly, in a language I didn't recognize. When she passed near the door, we all felt a wave of cold coming from outside, as if something were clinging to the other side. "You will repeat after me now," she said. We formed a new circle, this time inside the room. She began to pronounce phrases that sounded like commands, ordering any spiritual presence to be dispersed and forbidden from entering. We repeated in chorus, but with each word a sound began to overlap. Something scratched the door slowly, like long nails scraping wood. The noise ceased suddenly. The silence returned, heavy, until out of nowhere, a single bird sang outside. My aunt took a deep breath and said, "It's gone. For now." I didn't know if I felt relieved or even more scared. She spent the rest of the early morning walking through the backyard and the house, throwing salt in the corners, spreading a liquid that smelled of herbs, and placing small glass jars in strategic spots. I was exhausted, but couldn't sleep. It was then that something happened to me. I was sitting on the sofa when I began to feel pressure in my head, as if someone were trying to push my thoughts away. My fingers went numb, and an absurd urge to get up and open the door overcame me. It was as if something were calling me, softly and insistently. My aunt noticed and ran to me, placing the lit sage bundle on my forehead. The sensation vanished immediately, leaving behind a strange emptiness. She didn't say anything, just continued her work. The next day, she performed a final cleansing ritual, spreading more salt and burning incense throughout the property. She said what we had seen was not a lost soul or a common spirit, but something much older and dangerous, something that should not be called. She made me promise never to attempt a spirit session again, and I promised without hesitation. Since that night, my aunt has maintained protection rituals every month. I never played with that kind of thing again. Even so, from time to time in the middle of the night, I feel that sensation of being watched again, and at those times I am sure it is still waiting. If you want some advice, keep it well. Do not provoke what you do not understand, because that night we were lucky, and luck is something that always runs out. Chilling, you don't always have to summon something for it to show up, and the family in the next story knows that all too well. What started as small, strange occurrences turned into a direct encounter with a demonic presence that seemed to have chosen its victims. But before we get into it, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying these stories. So go ahead and hit the like button. It lets YouTube know you want more content like this and you won't miss any more horror stories. That night, the house felt different. The air was heavy, as if the darkness itself had seeped through the walls and spread into every corner. I felt it in my chest, a strange pressure, like something invisible was watching me closely, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. It wasn't just my imagination, everyone in the family noticed it. My mom and my grandma have always been sensitive to these kinds of things, but this time, even my dad, who always mocked such stories, started to feel uneasy. It was the beginning of summer in Ecuador, and my dad's family had come to visit. They lived far away, so it was rare for all of us to be under the same roof. At first it was lively, long conversations, the smell of home-cooked food, and laughter echoing through the house. But that good feeling didn't last. 3 days after they arrived, strange things started happening. First, it was the doors. No matter if they were locked or propped up with chairs, they would slam shut with force, always at night. My mom's dog, who usually slept peacefully in the corner of the living room, started barking non-stop at a fixed point in the hallway, his fur bristling and his eyes fixed on the emptiness. And every so often everyone swore they saw shadows darting across the hallway, quick, dark, and vanishing before anyone could react. My cousin, my aunt's son, was the first to be truly affected. He started having nightmares so vivid that he would wake up sweating, crying, and trembling. He said he dreamed of a huge all-black figure standing at his bedroom door, just staring. The most disturbing detail was that he felt the same fear when awake, as if the thing was right there, lurking. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. Even my dad's family, who claimed not to believe in any of this, started acting differently. At night, they avoided being alone in any room and whispered about the noises they were hearing too. My uncles reported feeling a heavy spiritual presence, something that didn't seem like just negative energy, but rather a living, attentive force, almost provocative. My maternal grandmother, who had never been intimidated by such things, decided it was time to ask for answers. That night, while we were all gathered in the living room, she stood up, closed her eyes, and prayed aloud, asking God to show us what was happening. I'll never forget that moment. The air seemed to get colder, as if an icy current had swept through the house. Everyone fell silent, listening only to the distant sound of the wind hitting the windows. The next day, my paternal grandmother woke up pale, her eyes wide open. She told us that during the night she had woken up in the middle of the night and saw a demon standing at the bedroom door. Her voice trembled as she described it. A dark figure, taller than anyone in the house, with glowing red eyes fixed on her with almost palpable hatred. She said she couldn't move, feeling a pressure on her chest and a strange ringing in her ears, as if something wanted to steal the air from her. Terrified, she started praying softly, and it was at that moment my paternal grandfather woke up. Realizing her state, he also began to pray. The two spent the rest of the night side by side, murmuring prayers, as if each word were a barrier against that presence. The next morning, there was no more room for doubt or attempts to rationalize what was happening. My dad called a priest known to the family and asked him to come as soon as possible. When the priest arrived, he brought holy water and a small crucifix, walking through every room praying and sprinkling water on the walls, doors, and windows. He asked us to pray together aloud to strengthen our faith and break any connection that entity had with the house. It was an intense moment. As the priest prayed, I heard a loud thud from afar, as if something heavy had fallen upstairs. But no one moved to check. It was as if we all knew we shouldn't. After the blessing, the changes were almost immediate. The doors stopped slamming on their own. The dog went back to sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had happened. My cousin stopped having nightmares and went back to playing during the day. The atmosphere in the house became light again, as if that shadow had finally left us. But my paternal grandmother, she never forgot. Whenever someone mentioned the episode, she would change the subject or ask not to talk about it anymore. To this day, she says she hopes never to see anything like it again, and that if it happens, maybe this time no prayer will be enough to drive it away. And me? Well, I grew up hearing this story, and every time I think about it, I feel a strange chill. Because deep down, we all know that it wasn't just a spiritual accident that ended with a blessing. It was a real demonic encounter, and the feeling of being watched that never really went away. Scary, right? What did you think of that story? On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. On that stifling night in the Philippines, the air felt heavier than usual, as if something was clinging to it. I had seen many strange things in my life, but in that place, the feeling of being watched was so intense it felt like someone was breathing right behind my shoulder. I firmly believe in the authority that Christ has given us over any evil spirit. It's not arrogance, it's faith. And when you've witnessed demonic possessions up close, you understand that this fight isn't just against flesh and blood, but against something that likes to hide in the shadows. Over the years, I've seen people change before my eyes. Calm men turn into beasts. Delicate women scream with a force that seemed impossible. It wasn't just anger, it was as if something was using their bodies as a disguise. Their expressions changed, their eyes looked different, and almost always there was a sudden violence, as if that negative energy needed to manifest itself by destroying everything around it. What impresses me the most is how often they start speaking in strange tongues, words that make no sense but carry a weight, as if the very atmosphere of the place changed. I've heard sounds that seem to come from an animal, growls, squeals, whistles, and I'm not talking about any common animal. It's a sound that, when you hear it, you feel it comes from something that shouldn't exist. I remember one case in a small apartment. We were called because an entire family was terrified by the behavior of one of the residents. A few Christians and I went there to pray. At first, he just stared at us with a strange smile, but within minutes he started screaming and writhing. When we began to pray, he jumped up and ran to the window. It was as if his own body was thrown out. He fell from the second floor, and I swear he wasn't hurt. He got up instantly, as if nothing had happened. I've seen demons act like snakes, slithering on the ground, moving their bodies in a way impossible for a human being. They do this to distract, to instill fear, to make you lose focus. And if you let fear in, you've already lost half the battle. Another case I'll never forget was of a man who called us saying his house was taken over by a bad energy. He couldn't sleep well, felt like something was following him around the house, especially in the kitchen. When I got there, just crossing the door, I could feel the heavy spiritual presence. The air was colder in that room, and there was no physical explanation for it. We started talking and found out he had objects related to the occult scattered around the house. I explained that those things gave legal rights for these forces to be there, but he refused to remove them. He said they were keepsakes, family gifts. We left there with the feeling that nothing would change as long as he didn't decide to get rid of them. There was also the case of a woman who appeared with a swollen stomach, as if she were pregnant, but the doctors found nothing wrong. She said she felt pressure inside, as if something was pushing her from the inside out. I realized it was a curse. We did a simple prayer, nothing elaborate, just declaring liberation in the name of Jesus. Within minutes, the swelling began to subside. She fell to her knees, crying, saying she felt as if something had left her. But nothing prepared me for what happened in Quebec, a small town in the Philippines. There, a 12-year-old boy was terrifying everyone around him. It wasn't just rebellion or aggressive behavior. There was something more. His gaze was fixed as if he could see through you. People said he appeared in distant places in a matter of seconds, and whenever he passed, the animals would get agitated, barking or running away. When I arrived, I found the town in silence. The doors were closed, the streets empty. We were received by some local pastors who had already tried to pray for him, but always ended up being pushed or hurt in some way. We decided to gather to face him together. As we walked to his house, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that we were being watched from all sides, as if something was following us through the shadows. When we entered, the atmosphere felt suffocating. There was the boy, standing in the corner of the room, smiling. The smile wasn't that of a child, it was something cold, calculating. In his hand, a small talisman hung by a cord. I immediately recognized the type of object. It wasn't just a trinket, but something given by these forces to maintain the bond. He didn't blink, didn't move. He just watched us, as if he knew exactly what we would do next. As we approached, the boy slightly tilted his head like a predator evaluating its prey. No one said anything, but the pressure in the air increased, and the silence was broken by a strange hum, almost like a distant swarm. When one of the pastors tried to take the first step, the boy let out a scream that didn't sound human. It was guttural, deep, reverberating off the walls as if echoing from within the earth. He advanced with a force disproportionate to his size. He knocked 2 men to the ground and ran to the kitchen with movements too quick, as if his body was just a shell, and something much more agile was controlling everything. We ran after him, and that's when I felt the spiritual presence become more aggressive. A sudden cold took over the room, and the metallic smell in the air almost made my stomach turn. We tried to corner him, but he writhed and escaped like a snake, slipping through the arms that tried to hold him. His eyes were black, completely taken over. Meanwhile, the talisman swayed on his chest, and I realized that whenever we tried to pray, he held it tightly. It wasn't a coincidence. I took a deep breath and approached, ignoring the threats and curses in languages I didn't understand. We began to pray together, and the boy reacted with convulsions, arching his body and trying to bite anyone who came near. The sound of long, high-pitched whistles began to fill the room, but it didn't come from his mouth. It was as if the house itself was screaming to drive us out. At one point, he lunged at me with his face inches from mine, whispering something so low I could barely hear. "He is mine, since before he was born." That chilled me to the bone, but we couldn't back down. I looked directly at the cord around his neck and realized that would be the key. I asked one of the pastors to distract the entity while I advanced from behind. It was a matter of seconds. I grabbed the talisman and pulled hard. The boy let out a roar so loud I felt my ears vibrate, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The cord broke and fell to the floor, but before I could touch it, it started to burn and turn to ashes before our eyes. It was as if the negative energy that loomed over the house had been sucked out. The boy collapsed, breathing heavily, but with his eyes returning to normal. Tears streamed down his face, and the silence that followed was so dense that no one moved for a few seconds. The danger seemed to have passed, but we all knew that object hadn't appeared there by accident. Someone had given it to him. Someone who knew what they were doing. And if there were more of these talismans out there, this was just a piece of something much bigger. When we left the house, the town seemed to breathe again. Doors began to open. Neighbors looked out the windows, some making the sign of the cross. The boy was exhausted but smiled differently, relieved. Even so, as we walked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched again. And at the end of the street, for a brief moment, I swear I saw a silhouette standing still, staring at us. There was no time to blink and confirm, but I knew that presence hadn't given up yet. So, after all this, tell me, would you have the courage to face something like that? If you made it all the way to the end, comment, "The shadows follow me," so I know you survived with me until here. If you enjoyed the experience, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got plenty more stories like this. There's a video right here with more cases of demonic encounters. Click it and keep going with me there.